Hello, my name is Jeremy Halk, and I'd like to thank you for making the choice to join us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. I wonder as we get started today if you can remember the worst meal that you've ever eaten. I can. Now, honestly, I've had some really bad meals in my life. I remember this one time that I was on a road trip and I was starving, and I decided that it was in my best interest to eat one of those over-processed chicken sticks from a gas station roller. I've eaten some things on mission trips that we probably don't need to talk about. But you see, the worst meal that I've ever had in my life wasn't because of the food. It was because of where I was sitting. A family from the church where we were working at the time invited me over for dinner, and they were very sweet people, and they were really great cooks. But you see, about 10 minutes into the meal, I realized something was off. Somewhere between passing the roast beef and the mashed potatoes, the conversation took a turn. You see, that was the moment that I understood that we weren't just having a meal together. They had an agenda. They had this grievance about the church, and there was a list of people that they were frustrated with. And as I sat there, I began to get this sinking feeling that the invitation to dinner had nothing to do with the food and all to do with this gossip about things they wanted me to fix. Now, they believed they were doing the right thing. They were very generous with their home and with their food. They were completely convinced that they were on the right side of things. And I was stuck in this gap between what they thought was happening and what was actually happening. And I believe that gap might just be one of the most dangerous places that a person can live. Being convinced that you're right, confident in your standing, and actually being completely and utterly wrong. Jesus told us a story about that. And it might be one of the most unsettling things that Jesus ever said. If you remember, over the last couple of weeks, we've looked at the fact that Jesus is on the Mount of Olives during the final week of his life. His disciples have gathered around him and they've asked, what's it going to look like when you come back? What are going to be the signs? And in order to answer those questions, Jesus, he gives them stories. Actually, 3 stories back to back: the parable of the 10 virgins, the parable of the talents, and the one that we're going to look at today, which is, maybe more like a vision than a story. It's known as the parable of the sheep and the goats, but I like to think of it more as the parable coming out of left field, or the parable of I didn't see that coming. Because everybody's taken surprised by what Jesus says. And if we're honest, so are we. It's just that we've heard this parable so many times that the shock has worn off of it. I believe that Jesus is intentional and was intentional about everything that he did. And he was intentional about telling this story as the last public teaching that he ever does. Listen to how the story opens. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Like all of the stories that Jesus tells, he starts with an image that the people are familiar with. Shepherds separated their flocks because during the day you would allow the sheep and the goats to graze together on the same hillside in the same fields, moving as the same herd. But at night, the shepherd is going to have to separate them because sheep and goats have different needs. Sheep, they've got all of this wool. They can handle the cold. Goats, they're going to need some kind of shelter. And so the detail of the left hand and the right hand, that's intentional. The right hand is a place of honor. That's where the king would sit someone that he wanted to elevate. So when Jesus says that the shepherd separates them, some on his right and others on his left, everybody understood. One group is welcomed, the other group is, they're turned away. Jesus goes on to explain why some are welcomed and some are not. Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me.'" The first thing I want to draw your attention to is that the kingdom was prepared for the sheep before they did anything. Before they fed a hungry person or clothed a cold neighbor, the inheritance was already being prepared for them. Jesus adamantly teaches there is no way that you or I can earn our inheritance. We're not going to ever be good enough or successful enough or smart enough to earn our place in heaven. It's a gift that God offers us. We get to enter the kingdom prepared by our Father only when we accept the gift, the gift that we're not worthy to receive. Secondly, I want you to look at what Jesus is using to make the designation of who is a sheep and who's a goat. I want you to notice there's no mention on how well they kept the Sabbath. There's no pop quiz on their theology. There's no doctrinal statement. Nobody is looking for a certificate on perfect church attendance. Nobody has the medal that they won at a Bible Bowl in the 6th grade. Jesus says it all boils down to food, water, welcome, clothing, and care. Honestly, it reads less like a sermon and more like a brochure of ministry opportunities that you would find in the foyer of a church. We hear feed the hungry and we picture collecting food for interfaith ministry. We hear visit a prisoner and we picture an organized jail ministry. And that's not what Jesus is describing. He's talking about something far more immediate, far more costly. There's no social safety net in the first century, no government programs, no shelters, no food banks. If you're hungry, you depended entirely on the mercy of whoever happened to be near you. If you were a stranger far from home, you were genuinely in danger. Hospitality was essential for survival. So if somebody opened their home for you, they're, well, practically saving your life. And prisoners? The prisons that we have today offer 3 meals and a bed to sleep on. But in that world, the prisoners didn't just lose their freedom, they lost their food supply. Families were expected to bring provisions, and, well, if nobody came, you starved to death. So visiting a prisoner isn't just a nice gesture, it's often the difference between life and death. And it comes with a cost greater than the cost of the food that you're providing. You see, when you visited a prisoner, you're associating with somebody the world has already decided didn't matter. And there's a part of the passage that I think that we've gotten so familiar with, we've stopped feeling how strange it actually is. You see, both groups, the sheep and the goats, are equally surprised. Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you? Neither of these groups have any idea what Jesus is talking about. Nobody's carrying around a record of their ministries. There's no post on social media to go back and to look at. They saw somebody that was hungry, and they either fed them or made an excuse to why they wouldn't. They saw somebody alone in a cell, and they either showed up or they chose to stay away. That's it. There's no awareness of the cosmic significance. It's just a reflex. And then comes the sentence that really should stop every one of us cold. I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me. Notice that Jesus doesn't say you did it in my name. He doesn't say you did it as my representative or somebody involved in my cause. He says you did it to me. I was the hungry one. I was the thirsty one, the stranger, the one who smelled like I hadn't had a shower in a week. And yet you came up and you touched me and you fed me, and you didn't even know it. Neither group hated Jesus. Neither group stood in opposition to his kingdom. The sheep and the goats both call him Lord. They know the language. They would have told you that they were a follower of the way because they had a t-shirt with scripture plastered across the front of it. They had a bumper sticker on their car. They loved to repost devotional thoughts all over their social media. But the goats respond with something, well, it's closer to indignation than confusion. They say, Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and not help you? The JHV would say, Jesus, if we knew it was you, we'd have done something. We'd have rolled out the red carpet. We'd have written a check. But we just didn't see you. And Jesus will respond to them when you refuse to help somebody that you thought was beneath you, when you made an excuse as to why you shouldn't get involved. You are actually refusing to help and to honor me. And that's the part that really convicts me about the story. You see, the goats aren't hostile to the poor, they're just oblivious. They're not cruel, they're just busy and distracted, moving through a world full of need without ever letting it register as something that mattered enough to interrupt their plans for the day. Their sin isn't dramatic rebellion, it's indifference. It's that quiet decision that this particular need is somebody else's problem. And God treats that indifference as a personal offense. The sheep are welcomed in because they lived their lives showing mercy, one small, unnoticed choice at a time. And the goats are living their lives avoiding messy and difficult situations. The judgment is based on how well do you live out your love for Christ. Character isn't made in the dramatic moments. Character is found in the ordinary ones, the interruptions, the people who inconvenience us. Which means that you and I can do all of the right things and still be a goat if our heart has the wrong motive. I've watched people volunteer at shelters and in food banks because it looks good on their social media feed. I know people who have made large donations to churches or to children's homes because they needed a tax write-off. I know people that were willing to show up after a tornado or a hurricane to assist in cleanup efforts as long as there was a camera nearby. But they never stopped to step into the genuine inconvenience for the sake of someone else's dignity. And the acts look identical, but it's the heart behind them that tells the whole story. Unfortunately, there's a version of Christianity in comfortable suburban America that's gotten really good at talking about justice and compassion without ever actually getting down in the muck and the mire of the need. We use the right language, we share the right post online, we give to the right organizations, and somewhere along the way, we've structured our whole lives so that we actually never have to sit across the table from someone who reminds us what it's like to have nothing. And I'm not pointing my finger at anybody. I live in that world as well. I feel the pull of it in my own life, that gravitational tug towards comfort and sameness, towards a community where everybody's more or less fine, more or less like me. And Jesus describes a life ordered differently, a life built around interruption, a life where our default response to someone in need is not, there's a government program that can help you with that or a church program that can help you with that. Instead, the response is, what can I do to step into this moment and help you right now? And I want to go back to the point that I think is eternally important. Jesus isn't teaching salvation by works. He's not saying that if you feed enough hungry people, you're in. That's not what's happening here. Remember, the sheep, had no idea they were doing anything significant. They're not earning anything. Mercy is the fruit of their heart, a heart that's already been transformed by grace, not some kind of transaction to secure the favor of God. People who've genuinely been changed by the love of God live differently than the people who simply profess to know who God is. When you understand what a beautiful gift God has given you, you can't help but go out and to share that gift of love with other people. You are drawn to share the same mercy and grace that you received. You understand that every blessing in your life is an opportunity to bless someone else. You give your time, your talent, and your treasure to others as naturally as taking your next breath. Which means the question Jesus is asking in the story is not, have you ever done a kind thing? The real question is, has your life been reshaped by the love and the grace that God offers you in a way that makes mercy a normal reflex instead of a performance? Every time you and I pause to think about whether we should help somebody or not, does this guy in the corner actually need my money, or is he going to use my $5 to do something sketchy? Those are the moments that we lose the capacity to see Jesus in other people. The hungry man on the corner is not an inconvenience. He's an invitation to a sacred interruption. The overwhelmed mom struggling to count her nickels and dimes at the store is not a drain on our patience. She's a chance to stand in the presence of Jesus. There's this other thing in the text that I want to point out to you because for years I missed it. Look at verse 34. The kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. From the very beginning, it was God's intention for people to be in the kingdom. Eternal life with Him was always the plan. You and I were created with the intention that we would live with God in His kingdom. But there's a contrast in verse 41. Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. You see, the fire was never designed for us. It was designed for the devil and his angels. It was never God's intention for anyone created in His image to enter the eternal fire. And yet people still end up there. Even though that's not what the Father wanted, it's not what He intended. And that matters because it reframes the entire gospel. The gospel is not that we have found ourselves stuck in some haunted house and we finally see an emergency exit. The gospel declares that we were created for the kingdom and we wandered away from the kingdom and God moved heaven and earth to bring us back. So what do we need to learn from the parable of the sheep and the goats while we're sitting in our climate-controlled rooms with our nice clothes and our carefully arranged lives? Let me offer you a couple specific things that I think we need to take from this parable. First, we have to stop seeing people as projects and start seeing Jesus. When we reduce somebody to a problem that we need to solve or a charity case to check off our list, we lose the ability to see them at all. But when we start looking for the face of Christ in the people in front of us, well, then everything shifts. Secondly, we need to redefine greatness. The sheep in the stories, they're not influencers. They're not the ones with the biggest reach. They're just ordinary people who respond to the need right in front of them with what they already had: food, water, a spare bedroom, some old clothes, a ride to the hospital, a trip to visit someone. Nobody's going to write a letter about that. Nobody's going to write a bestseller about that. Nobody's going to put an article in the paper about that. But in Jesus' economy, that's the stuff of eternal significance. And I think we need to close the gap between Sunday and Monday. The goats don't miss Jesus because they hate Him. They missed Him because they were busy. They were so busy with their own important things that they couldn't notice Jesus standing in the margins. It's so easy to compartmentalize our faith. We come and sing the songs, we nod at the sermon, we drop something off in the offering, and then on Monday, we just go back to our normal, regular life. Jesus didn't die on a cross and raise from the grave so that we can have a nice hour together on Sunday. He wants to invade your Monday so that you will be his hands and his feet in the break room when you see a coworker start crying or when your phone rings at midnight. Almost every encounter that Jesus had in the Gospels was an interruption. The woman with the bleeding disorder, Bartimaeus shouting from the roadside, the paralyzed man lowered in from the roof. If we want to find Jesus, we have to let him interrupt the lives that we've carefully constructed. We need to commit to actually seeing people that God places in our path, not through a program, not through a donation that runs on autopilot, but actually seeing them, showing up, sitting across from somebody whose life is harder than ours and choosing to stay in that room. Maybe it's connecting with people experiencing homelessness, not just giving them money, but learn their names, share a meal with them, hear their story. Maybe it's writing letters to somebody who's in prison. Did you know that for a lot of people in prison, mail call is the most anticipated moment of the week? And yet most of them don't ever get anything. And if they were to get a letter in your own handwriting addressed to them by name, that is presence in the middle of absence. I don't know, maybe it's the family down the street that you've been meaning to check on, but the moment never seemed right. Or maybe it's the nursing home a couple blocks from your house full of people that haven't had a visitor in months. Who are you not seeing? Who in your circle is hungry or lonely or a stranger or sick or locked away? And you've just walked past them 100 times because you're so focused on your own concerns, you never took the time to actually look. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty. I want to hand you a fuller invitation, a more awake way of living. You see, the sheep and the goats, they both ask the same question, Lord, when did we see you? They're identical words with completely different posture underneath them. If you've genuinely encountered the grace of God, you've stood before the throne with nothing to offer, and God extended mercy to you anyway. And if that's happened, you already know what it's like to be one of the people on this list. You know what it's like to hunger for something that only God can provide. You know what it's like to be a stranger needing welcome. You know what it's like to be sick spiritually, relationally, emotionally, and have somebody come and to look after you anyway. The people on this list aren't other people. Actually, they're us, just in different forms of need. The life that Jesus is calling us to isn't a life of straining and striving to be good enough. It's a life that simply flows outward from a center of received grace. As we get ready to close, I think we need to be honest about how the passage ends because, well, I don't think that we're allowed to skip past it. And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life. Jesus doesn't soften that. He doesn't attach a qualifying clause or try to walk it back. He says eternal life or eternal punishment. And what separates the two groups isn't what they claim to believe or whether their theology was airtight. It's whether the grace they claim to have received actually changed the way they lived. Genuine faith produces something. It produces people who are captivated by love and welcome of God and are oriented outward. They notice the faces in the margin. The question this story puts in front of every one of us is, has the grace of God actually gotten deep enough to reorder our priorities? Deep enough to make us someone who moves toward need instead of away from it? The table is a place of remembrance. It's the place where we remember what was already done for us. Every single thing on the list, Jesus already chose, because that was the only way to reach us where we actually live. Jesus was hungry in the wilderness. He was thirsty on the cross. He was a stranger handed over by his own people, stripped naked while his clothes were divided among the soldiers. He was sick with the sin of the whole world that was laid on him. He was imprisoned and bound and sealed in a tomb. The one who says, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me, is the one who already became the least of these for us. He became vulnerable on a cross so that we could be welcomed into the kingdom that was prepared for us before the world even began. That's why the gospel is the power source behind everything this passage asks of us. It was never guilt. It was never this fear of landing on the wrong side of judgment. It's the love of a king who became the least of these so that the least of these could become his own. Jesus isn't just coming back someday at the end of the age. He's here right now in the hospital waiting room, standing in line at a food pantry, on a cot in a shelter downtown, behind bars, in the car, sitting next to you in traffic. He's waiting for people who will start seeing with kingdom eyes. Don't miss him. He's right there in front of you. And today we're offered the opportunity to go to the table to meet him there, to be reminded how the greatest became the least, so that the least can be invited to their place at his table in his kingdom that has been prepared for us before we were born. I hope that you have a wonderful week. And maybe this week you can begin to see people not as things to avoid or things to have to deal with, but people created in the image of Christ. Opportunities for you to show the love and the mercy and the grace that you have already received to others. But more importantly, I hope that you never forget how deeply you're loved and cared for. Have a great week. I look forward to seeing you very soon.